It's our Streaming Wars segment where we talk about is anything that's happening in the world of the streaming, basically live streaming or streaming media that has caught our attention. Um, and whether you're talking about Netflix, whether you're talking about Disney Plus, Peacock, Hulu, HBO, Go Max or Max Go or whatever it's called, any of that stuff that's actually happening in the world of streaming wars. So I want to lead off real quick. I don't have a graphic. I don't have a story. I just have an observation. And I think Eric might have a story that might help to back this up. But I found this rather ironic. I've been reading a lot about the Zack Snyder cut. Now, I like the idea of the Zack Snyder cut because I would like to see what his original vision was for the film, just because I've enjoyed a lot of his movies, and I'm just genuinely curious to see what his original intention was with it versus the film that we actually got. How completely different it is or isn't from the film that we got remains to be seen until obviously we get the chance to watch the film. What I found really curious is I saw a bunch of news articles and items kind of over the last several days and talked about how that for, what is it? It's HBO Max or HBO Go. I think it's HBO Go. What is it called? Anyhow.
HBO Max. You're talking about what's coming. You're talking about what debuted basically today, right?
Yes. So here's my whole observation.
HBO Max. Yes, HBO Max.
HBO Max. The thing that I found most interesting about this is I saw a lot of different, angles on stories and stuff, and I had a hard time trying to pick one, which is why I just decided not to pick one at all, because they were all kind of dancing around the same issue, and I feel like I could just sum it up pretty succinctly like this. A lot of them were saying they wondered if the executives were hoping that basically the Zack Snyder Justice League could do for the new HBO streaming service what The Mandalorian has actually done for Disney Plus. Now, for me, I feel like that's apples and oranges. Because here's the most important thing. It's not like the new HBO streaming service just rolled out with a Snyder Cut. Because I was debating on getting the new service. I was like, okay, when do I need to get it? When do I need to get it? And I was looking into it today, and I honestly didn't realize that today was going to be the day that the service actually went live. And my main thing that's going to have me pull the trigger, I want to see that Snyder Cut. Well, Snyder Cut's not here. Snyder Cut isn't going to be here until 2021. So I was thinking, I'm probably good to wait then. I'm good to wait. So I'm not going to be jumping on HBO right away because I can afford to wait. Because that's the thing. I've noticed that with a lot of these streaming services, they have the same content problem. It almost feels like they're in such a hurry to roll these services out that they don't have really the content to really support what it is that they're trying to sell. Now, most of the stuff, now I will eventually get it because I love the Warner film library. There's a lot of great films that Warner Brothers has. That's probably eventually, if I get it before the Zack Snyder Cut even hits, that'll be probably what causes me to pull the trigger and to go ahead and check out the service and see what's going on with it. But I just find that it's just this recurring problem that we're seeing in the streaming wars. Everyone's rolling out, but the content, it just isn't quite there, the new content. And what I've also known as an independent publisher is this. I've learned this over the years too. Even though you may have a great series and you want to think it's an evergreen and people will continue to support and buy it and whatever, at the end of the day, people typically just judge you by the last thing you did. So if you don't have something that really acts as sort of the light post or the example of what you can do with your streaming service, you're kind of out in the cold. Regardless of what you think about, the CBS All Access with their Star Trek shows, at least they have those to lean on. Hulu's got not Hulu. Netflix is what I was thinking of. Netflix has got a lot of really great content that's constantly coming out. But there's a lot of other services that they're just not in that same boat. And I feel like with this HBO, correct me if I'm wrong, Eric, I don't think HBO has anything new that's just kicking off with the launch of the service. Do they?
Well, as we like to always say, content is king, right?
Yeah.
Content is king. That's what's going to make or break any of these services. And yes, along those lines, I have this Verge article. And it says, HBO Max's catalog is full of weird holes. Quote, its library is impressive, but it's also impossible to know what to expect or what's coming. Its HBO Max has arrived, bringing with it a precious few new original shows and an absolutely stuffed back catalog of terrific TV and movies. In addition to HBO's extremely good library, Max adds a mountain of content produced and or licensed by parent company Warner Media, like Friends and the Harry Potter franchise. It's enough to please someone of every taste, but the more you dig, the more you find strange holes in the library, and the more you realize it's not really clear what HBO Max is supposed to offer. Now, there's a really interesting part of the article here where they talk about specifically the DC properties, the Time Warner DC properties. It says Man of Steel is not available. In fact, none of the Superman live action movies or television shows, including Superman Returns, Smallville, or Lois and Clark, are included on HBO Max, at least initially. And they bring up the issue that you brought up months ago when we were talking about the streaming wars. DC Universe. Because DC Universe has most of that content. So in a way, HBO Max is competing against itself for legacy content, which I think is crazy.
See, that says to me, in all honesty, that and here's the thing that kills me. Here's the thing that kills me, okay? When I was at DC years ago, part of the point of the New 52 was to actually take the various DC properties and kind of get them all in line and kind of clean up some of the stuff that's happening with the histories and the connections and all the multiverses and all the other stuff to make it a little bit easier for people to come into these various franchise properties, stories, such on and so forth. Because what they wanted to be able to do is take the characters of the DC universe and sort of leverage them, across all media. And they wanted it to be a little bit more interconnected. And they wanted to jettison a lot of stuff they didn't need that they felt was baggage. So it'd be easier to integrate these things into these various opportunities, whatever you want to call them, in order to maximize these properties. That was the whole point of the New 52, was to clear the slate and give them an easier to market and sell an entry point for new readers, new viewers, such on and so forth. And to have it be where the TV shows and the comics, their graphic novels, are more in line with each other. So if you're watching the show and you pick up a comic or you pick up a graphic novel, or you enjoy an animated show and you pick up a comic or you pick up a graphic novel, that they seem to be more in line with each other and not random, disparate things that have nothing to do with each other almost. So that was the whole point. So this Verge article really has me scratching my head, because it really feels like there's been no effort to really definitely integrate what's happening with the DC universe into the HBO Max service. And that's funny, because I remember when I used to listen and watch a lot of the other various movies and TV show commentary, YouTube shows and whatever that I don't really watch anymore. There was a lot of discussion about the fact that the DC universe, a lot of people felt like, oh, it'll just be folded into HBO Max. And I thought, well, there's an interesting opportunity to leverage the value of the DC Universe properties, specifically when you talk about their comics catalog, because they have a lot of digital comics that are available through DC Universe. I have a lot of friends that they say that's the real value of the DC Universe app, is all that amazing content that you have access to, because they're putting a lot of newer content available as well. And it actually got me started reading digital comics when I had my subscription to DC Universe. I don't have my DC Universe subscription anymore, but I'm reading a lot more digital comics now than I had before, and DC Universe what got me into doing it. And I was really curious how they would take the strength of the DC Universe, integrate it, and leverage it to actually provide an extra selling advantage and some really unique content for HBO Max. But it looks like they're not doing any of that at all. It looks like they're literally going to be competing with each other. That's insane to me.
No, I think it is insane. But it's also interesting to note this article is all about legacy content. Like, they also talk about the fact that one of the Hobbit films is missing from the catalog. and all sorts of other random films that are missing. They actually even talk a little bit about the Merry Melodies and the fact that a lot of that stuff is missing. By the way, that's also a big criticism I have of Disney Plus, is there's tons of wonderful Walt Disney shorts that are missing from Disney Plus, probably mostly for reasons of political correctness and stuff like that. But that's probably the same thing that's happening on HBO Max. But this is all legacy content. None of this is new content that they're talking about. This article is pretty small, and they can't come up with one new show or movie or anything that is supposed to make me want to get HBO Max. And HBO Max, like every other streaming service, content is king. You know, I need the content. The only thing we're talking about is a Snyder Cut. That's the only thing we're talking about, which doesn't come out until March of next year. March of next year is when the Snyder Cut is supposed to be coming out. It's not ready to go. And it's kind of interesting. Amanda Sam brings up a point with this. He says, reboots repeatedly milk recognized story properties at reduced investment risk. Snyder Cut news makes me wonder if releasing different cuts of the same movie will similarly offer new profits at lesser risk. Amanda San, I have to be honest with you. I don't know why they haven't been doing this, longer. Because to me, it absolutely makes sense to keep doing different cuts. Now, I should say there was a movement for a while, especially on DVD. When DVD started to get big, we started to see a lot of director cuts. Director cuts started to become a thing, and we started to see more and more director cuts. And something happened where I guess maybe they weren't as profitable as they were hoping. That's the only thing I can think of. Dave, we touched on the Donner cut when we were doing our Snyder cut coverage last week. And I often wonder, was maybe the Donner cut not that successful? And that's why you don't see more of that kind of stuff happening? Because to me, it would seem like an actual decent business decision to do this. So you're talking about, recognized properties, there's less risk, but I don't know. At the end of the day, I don't know how profitable these director cuts actually are, or how popular, for that matter.
Well, I think it depends. It really, you're talking about content is king. I think it depends upon what the actual property is and what it is that you're doing with it. I personally, I really enjoy a lot of times the director's cuts. And for example, I said there's many examples where the director's cut is better than the original theatrical release. For example, the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie, not a great movie. But I feel like the director's cut is far superior to the one that actually came out in theaters. It still has a lot of the same problems, but at least the story seems more coherent. And there's a lot of things that just make more sense. And it's a little bit more engaging for me. I just find it more interesting. You look at things like Watchmen. There's a theatrical cut, a director's cut, and there's I forget what they call it, a renegade, whatever. They throw everything in Black Freighter and all that into one giant long thing. I quite liked the director's cut a little bit better than the theatrical. But I think for me, that's just a purist idea. Whether I can see the difference or not sometimes, I feel like I like the idea that I'm seeing the original vision as intended. I like that. I like that idea. So it's just like anything else. Sometimes it depends upon how you sell it. But I would say there are definitely examples where the director's cut is far superior to the film that was released theatrically. I think that Ben Affleck Daredevil for me is the easiest one to pull up off the top of my head. And then James Stone actually put in a comment. And he says, well, I like the theatrical cut of Daredevil, but the director's cut is superior. I think that's what he's getting at. I personally, I feel that way too, James. And there's things I quite like in the theatrical cut, but I just feel like the director's cut just flows better, just works better. And you see examples too of sort of like where there was a vision and an idea that because of budget or whatever, it didn't actually make it to fruition. What I think of here is there's a different director's cut or a different cut of the Thomas Jane Punisher film. Tell me if you saw this one, Eric. Did you see the other cut of the Punisher film where they take the Tim Bradstreet illustrations and we get this opening sequence? It's sort of like Frank Castle's last military sort of mission before he leaves military service.
No, I've only seen the theatrical version.
Well, there's another version where there's this whole sequence they wanted to film that would actually open it up, and it's basically Frank Castle's last major military mission before he leaves military service. And in that one, they also there's a subplot that they integrate into the film, and it really kind of helps to kind of fill in some gaps in the storytelling. You know, sometimes they cut things for the sake of time with theatrical cuts. It makes sense. And then sometimes it just damages the storytelling, and it makes it feel truncated, and you can tell there's something not quite right. You don't know what it is, but there's an offbeat. It's like, that doesn't ring true. That doesn't quite make sense. Even though the story may flow, you can sometimes still feel it. Something's missing. Something's not right. So,
well, that happens all the time. That was one of the awesome things with deleted scenes. In fact, there's actually there's numerous great examples of that from the Back to the Future trilogy, of deleted scenes that actually explain little weird things in the movie that you're like, wait a second, that was a little off. That scene actually would have helped me understand what happened, but for whatever reason, they decided to take it out. Those decisions are made all the time. Sometimes it's just because of timing, and they're thinking that the film is going too long. And a lot of times the director will say right on the commentary, which, by the way, that's why director commentaries are so much fun, and such a thing. They're such a good thing if you're into the filmmaking process or interested in the filmmaking process to listen to a director's commentary. A lot of times they explain it. That was one of the great things when DVDs started to become popular, is you would get like these tons of deleted scenes, and the director would tell you exactly why he took that scene out, why it's not there anymore. And a lot of times I would question the director's decision. I'd be like, okay, that scene totally would have explained what happened later way better than what we got in the theatrical version. But they were the one that decided to take it out. They were the one that actually said this doesn't work, or it doesn't flow, or whatever. Heck, I still want to see Biggs in Star Wars. It's kind of funny because we were touching upon George Lucas's various versions of Star Wars, the original movie, and some people think it's almost an abomination now in terms of the special edition. But I still want to see the scene with Biggs when they're at the whatever that is. I can't remember where they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be hanging out somewhere, picking up power converters or whatever.
Yeah.
I still want to see that, but it's gone. And you know what I mean? The only way you can see it is a really crappy version that they put like on basically a CD-ROM release. It's like the only version that you can find, which I remember that CD-ROM when it came out. And that was the big selling point of it, that they had that scene on there. That's all there is. So, the directors make all sorts of questionable decisions, and then they question their own decisions much later about whether that was right or wrong. How much of these director cuts are their original vision, and how much of it is them just, coming back later and saying, man, I really wish I did that differently. And I have two people correcting me and helping me here, Chris Roberts and James Stone. Tashi Station. Yes, Tashi Station. The Tashi Station scene. But I've always heard that Lucas has said it just would not have worked. It just did not flow right with that scene. And then there was no way to bring it back, because in that scene, Luke is actually observing the battle that we see in the first scene of the movie. And that would make the movie very different. If the first time we saw Luke, it's him looking at the battle, and we know he saw the battle, as opposed to the way that we're, introduced to Luke later, which of course is iconic for fans, seeing him with the silhouette and all that kind of stuff. So I get it. But a lot of these director cuts, I mean, they can get weird. But I do want to go back to Man of Sand's earlier point, or musing, or however you want to call it. The big question is not whether these director cuts are any good. one of the questions here is, are they profitable? And is this a possible trend that could continue forward? And my thought is they're not. Because if they were, that trend would have continued and we would have kept seeing more director cuts coming out all the time. I have a feeling a lot of these director cuts did not do well in terms of the money put in and the money that they got out.
Well, yeah, I don't know. I could see that. But what's interesting too is there's a lot of stories coming out again talking about the Zack Snyder cut, and apparently the Zack Snyder cut, part of the reason it's being funded is because they're primarily using it, which makes a lot of sense. They're using it as a publicity tool for HBO Max, which makes a lot of sense. My only thinking is it's like if they really wanted to use the Zack Snyder cut of Justice League to sell HBO Max, maybe HBO Max, they should have given it another year, spent a little bit more time on some other content and stuff, for it, newer shows, whatever, and then try and roll it out. But you know what? At the end of the day, apparently everyone's just going to roll these services out as soon as they think they're ready, even when they're not, because everybody's got to get to Tashi Station and get those power converters.
That's definitely a good way of putting it.